So welcome everybody to This is Good. This week we're discussing a piece published in Vox this month called The Agonizing Story of Tara Reade by the writer Laura McGann, who will be joining us in a bit. This week our panel is New York Times fashion director Vanessa Friedman, deputy business editor Pui-Wing Tam, Michael Schmidt, reporter in the Washington Bureau, assistant managing editor Sam Dolnick, Azam Ahmed, the bureau chief for Mexico, Central America, the Caribbean, and I think pretty much the rest of the world. And it looks like Sarah Lyall, for the second week in a row, has hacked into our Zoom call. And so you guys might know that when Mike Schmidt first started at the Times, his job was to like answer phones and sports on the sports desk and make
Your
copies. Answer my phone, right? It was literally my phone he was supposed to answer. And he just like kept going out and doing stories, just like wouldn't go away. We're just like, just sit there and answer the phone. But he just like kept filing stories. It just got to the point where we just couldn't resist him anymore and we had to hire him. And I feel like Lyall is up to that same sort of tactic. She just like keeps hacking into our Zoom call each week now. And she's just gonna make herself part of the panel. I think we
You
can live
had
with this.
no idea how good I am at computer programming or whatever you need to hack.
Yeah.
Coding, I'm really
Nice
good
work
at
by
coding.
you. So onward, Vanessa, you picked this one, and it's clearly, one of the stories of the moment. Do you want to tell us why?
Yeah, I mean, both as a writer and an editor, I have always sort of complicated and torn feelings about first person narration and reporting. And I'm sort of fascinated by stories that I think use it really well and smartly. And I felt like this was one of them because it is such a kind of complicated miasma of information. And I feel like readers are very confused by it. And so plunking you right in the middle of that was really effective.
And it took some courage too, right? I mean, it's a type of story, I think. What struck me is it's usually the terrain of like an ombudsman or something to like try to pick apart this sort of coverage. And she has been a reporter at the heart of it, and she did that herself. So it could have gone sideways so easily. And the first time I read it, I kept thinking like, oh my gosh, this next graph, it's going to be bad. It's going to be bad. It never did. It was like, wow, got to the end, like, wow, she pulled that off really gracefully.
Yeah, there's a thing in so many stories now, kind of a trend where, you're there along with the reporter as they're reporting it out. And I actually find it most of the time pretty tiring. It's like, you're supposed to do the work for us, so we don't have to. Like, I don't want to go knock on every door in the neighborhood with you. Tell me what the person said. But like, you kind of fetishize the reporting and turn it into a thing, like Serial kind of popularized that maybe. But I thought this story actually, to your point, Vanessa, really warranted it. Like, you needed to be along with her as she was trying to make sense of this in order to know how to make sense of it for yourself. There was no work that she could have presented at the end and said, here it is. You wanted to be there for that journey. So I thought, I found myself like initially a little bit allergic to it. And then she convinced me this was the way to tell the story.
But
Yeah,
also,
I mean, I think people,
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say that like people can be very performative about it. So you feel like the story is mostly about the reporter and not about the actual story. And I didn't feel that from this.
Yeah, that's one of the things I'm eager to ask her about is the genesis of that first person approach. Was it something that she conceived? Was it something that was assigned to her? My guess, just from reading it, I'm guessing she didn't delight in that first person approach.
The overall effect I thought was very sort of unsettling and uncomfortable. And it was just, and maybe that was her intention, but everything is so kind of gray and fluid. Like there's so little black and white in the whole situation. Like after I read it, I wrote down the words unresolved and uncomfortable. Like the whole thing kind of made you feel uncomfortable. There's like a little bit of like, are we kind of victim blaming here? I don't know. It just, the whole effect was unsettling, I found in the end. I don't know if that was the same for others or.
I totally agree. I felt, when I first saw the headline, I think it was like the agonizing story or something like that. I thought she meant that the story itself was agonizing, that the woman making the allegations had an agonized experience. And then I realized it was really about her. And I thought what really worked there for me wasn't just her personal experience and how we looked at what she went through, but what it said about this sort of reporting overall. That there's been a lot of this kind of, believe women reporting, Me Too reporting, and she sort of unveiled how complicated it is in many situations, how hard the people who do these stories work to evaluate all the different voices and all the different competing things. And I think when you look at some of the other stories, it gives you confidence that actually what you're reading is the result of really, really tough reporting, and how frustrating it was for her that she couldn't do that sort of thing for this story. I really appreciated that about this piece.
Yeah, what I liked is the only way to tell that story would have been in first person. I think all of us kind of have a knee-jerk reaction to placing ourselves at the center of a piece, but I think it served two purposes. One, you see all the hard reporting about Harvey Weinstein, things like that we can nail down. But the stories that don't come to light, they just kind of wither away, and nobody ever knows what happened or what was behind it. So it kind of served two purposes. One was like to air these allegations with the right amount of context, but also explain what goes on behind it. And I think as Sarah said, it's so engaging to see that process, especially with something that's so complicated and that's so at the heart of the public discourse right now. I thought even as somebody who's very reluctant to do first person, I thought it was kind of the only way to do that story justice. And I thought that's exactly what it did.
Yeah. And she elevated it even one more level, I thought, to just the whole notion of Me Too reporting, and that kind of tension, which I had never quite focused on, between believe all women and corroborate every single fact. And putting this Tara Reade accusation in that context, I thought, kind of elevated the story from like a he said, she said, which we'll never quite know, I think, to just the notion of like, how are we ever as a society going to resolve this stuff and what's fair?
Yeah, and I think she really, she got at how hard, as Sarah said, it is when you're reporting these stories and you're listening to these, really often upsetting narratives that are very hard to talk about, particularly with strangers. And then you still have to say things like, okay, but who else did you tell? And can I have their number? And can I like call and check up on you? It's a really strange position to be in as a reporter. And I think she conveyed that very well.
Well, also as a reporter, often... Sorry,
Mike, go ahead.
This reminded me a lot. In 2016, Dean asked my colleague Emily Steele and I to look into Bill O'Reilly and the accusations around him. And we initially came back to Dean after a few months with some of our reporting, which were anecdotes and stories that we had learned about from folks, from women who had been on his show. And we were ready to publish. And Dean said, look, these look like credible stories, but keep on digging and try and find the settlements. Because if you can find the settlements, then that's an actual legal structure that was created around this. And if we try and do this story, we're going to need to have as much as possible to lay out this stuff. So try and see if there's settlements. And in O'Reilly's case, there were so many of them. And that's what made that story, I think, as powerful as it was, that it was based on these legal agreements that he had reached with these women and paid them. And in a sense, it made telling that story a little clearer because there was a legal structure around them to hang the accusation, the story.
Mike, I mean, I remember you and Emily sitting in one of those windowed rooms for months and months and months reporting on the story. And before you had it bulletproofed in that way, were there lots of discussions about, should we just go with it now? Like, was there an ongoing discussion about, do we have enough?
We wanted to go. Emily and I wanted to go, early. We'd been launched on this thing. We'd spent months on it, several months on it. This is before, so it was like the summer of 2016 into before the election. And we were sort of ready to go. And this was before the Me Too, 2017, when the Harvey Weinstein stuff happened. And Dean recognized that if we did this story, that O'Reilly was gonna come after us, and that Fox was gonna come after us, and that we needed to bulletproof it as much as possible. And he said, go back and do more reporting and try and find these settlements. Now, the amazing thing about the story was that there actually were settlements. In all cases, there weren't. But by O'Reilly creating these settlements and paying these women as much as he did, it gave us something that really showed that that something had gone on.
Sarah, I think I might have cut you off. And after you go, Sarah, let's bring Laura on.
Yeah, I was just reading in the chat, one of the people listening in asked a question about the piece and said, she said in the piece that she wanted to believe Tara Reade, and was that unethical? And I thought that was interesting. I think from a reporter's point of view, you often want to believe the person you're talking to on the other end of the phone. You don't want to think people are lying to you. And you have to ask yourself, and she had to do that, which is very hard. What does she want? Why is she talking to me? Is she credible? And that's very, very difficult to do. And you see her struggling throughout that with this person who seems credible, but who has inconsistencies, who changes what she's saying, who other people change stuff. And so I don't think it's unethical to want to believe people, but I think she did it the right way. She was skeptical and sympathetic at the same time.
Right. Laura, can you join us? Ah, nicely done. Hey there.
I'm here.
So, could you hear our discussion? Did we say anything that you want to illuminate? Yeah, okay. Anything in particular you heard that you want to jump in on, or should we just start throwing out some questions?
Yeah, just start. I'm trying to think. It was very interesting. The person who raised in the chat the issue of, the reporter, Laura said she wants to believe Tara Reade. And I've actually been asked that a lot about the starting point of a journalist and what we think when we talk to a person. And I think kind of the idea I was going for with this piece was, I felt there was a moment where people were kind of following the Tara Reade story, and something about it felt different. Something felt more complicated than maybe other Me Too stories, and we're having trouble grappling with it. And I think a lot of people who were grappling with it, my sense, based on kind of feedback I've gotten, is that was the starting point of a lot of people, that you want to believe that a woman is coming forward and saying something true. And I mean, polling has been remarkable in post-Me Too, people's attitudes towards women who step forward and believing women. And so I wanted to be transparent that I am struggling with things that you, reader, are also struggling with. I want to believe this person, but I also have to look at what's, the details in front of me and grapple with those questions. So
can you talk about just the origin story of this one? Like, did you propose it? Was it assigned? How did it come to be?
I was cajoled into doing it. So a year ago, I checked out the story. I say it in my story that I just thought there's a story for me to do here. I don't have, and I mean, as Michael Schmidt was saying, like the Bill O'Reilly stories, like you see the wrongful firing, you see the deals that were cut, that women were paid to go away. And in the Tara Reade story, I had somebody saying that she had talked about experiencing kind of uncomfortable behaviors in the office, and then she says she was ousted, but I didn't have anything to corroborate that piece, the wrongful firing. And I couldn't just say she was wrongfully fired. I had no evidence to support that, even if, so that was kind of where I was. And then this year, she came forward and she kind of had her story, and my feeling was, based on what I had last year and what I'm looking at now, I can neither write the story is true, nor can I write Tara Reade is lying. So I have nothing to contribute to this conversation. I just have these, I have her account from last year and I have her account from this year, and I don't know what to do with this. I feel torn about it. I feel, I have various feelings about it, and I'm at a point where there's nothing further I can give the reader than to say it is complicated. And so one of my colleagues said, yes, that's what you should write, that people are grappling with this right now, and they feel like there's this sort of, I forget who used the word uncomfortable, but it is like, it an uncomfortable story. It makes people uncomfortable. And so Ezra Klein was my main editor on the story, and he also kind of cajoled me, and I filed a draft, and he said, well, what if you expressed more about this, of how you feel about it and how you're thinking about it as you're going through, because I kind of just laid out, here's what I heard last year, here's what I heard this year, like, make of it what you will. And it was like so boring, like, or not even boring, but it was like, I don't know,
Can I
like
ask you,
long quotes. And
was it always first person in both iterations of it?
yeah, I mean, I did say in the first iteration, I was trying to set up, okay, I spoke to her last year and I spoke to her this year, and I'm just going to lay out what she said, you know, kind of just it just sort of lined up what I learned last year and what I learned this year. And then it was like, I'm out. And what I added on later, it took a couple drafts, and what I added on later drafts was explaining more context. And this is also something I don't really write about. I'm not a media critic, and I don't write about media per se. And it was including that background of, well, okay, how is this story different than other Me Too stories, and trying to compare that to how reporters have approached others. And I felt there was one graph that I wrote that I thought, this is the most uncomfortable graph I've ever written, because I wrote, if more accusers had come forward last week, if her story had shaken loose more accusers, or if she had told a consistent story, or if the document had appeared, maybe this would have turned out differently. But those things didn't happen. And it felt, that was like the hardest thing for me, I think, in the story, was to say, like, these are the things I would have been looking for. And it's very hypothetical. So that felt very out of my comfort zone to say. And I think that the reason, the thing I wanted to do, and the reason I included that, was I think there was this part, there's this grappling with, we should believe women. There's Tara Reade, her story's a little unusual. And there was a sense, and I've gotten sort of emails back from people since the story ran, of a feeling of like, the media knows something we don't know. Like, you read these stories, sometimes it's like, what's the subtext here? What's the, like, is there more, like, there's more than you can share. And for me, the thing that I could bring was this, my discomfort and my sort of ambivalence about what to do with the story. And so that was, I think that's where that it was that sentiment that came out in later drafts that I wasn't originally planning and didn't file in my original draft. So that's how it evolved.
Yeah.
So you
Laura,
talked to
you
Tara
were-
Reade.
Do you have any sense?
You were getting.
Awesome. Go ahead.
Go.
I
was
oh
just
no,
gonna say,
thank you. I was just no, Azam, go.
For sure?
Yeah.
I was just going to say, I found it remarkably refreshing. I think so often these days in particular, we're looking for black and white stories. And that gray space, I mean, I think Sam said earlier, like I was waiting to find the moment when I was like, biased, this feels activist, and it never came. And it was very careful, even to the point of defending Biden at points, which is almost, which is a very risky thing to do at a time when, people realize we need to believe women, we want to believe women. And so, yeah, I mean, I thought it was remarkably refreshing to see something that was so complicated, so difficult. And I guess one of the questions I wanted to ask was, do you think it makes it easier to write a story like that being a woman? Because there's a natural sympathy and an understanding of the dynamic women experience that I think men are often blind to. And so you have more latitude to offer that gray space. You don't have to seem as black and white.
Well, I'm a woman, so I can only say it was hard for me to write. I don't know if it would have been harder. I mean, I could see, I don't know. I think there are talented, I actually think there are talented men who write about Me Too. I mean, I think, Michael's work on Bill O'Reilly, even though it was pre-Me Too, and like, I actually feel very strongly that men and women should write about these issues, because it's not, I don't know, men experience harassment and men experience sexual assault, and we need, it's not a women's problem, it's bigger than that. So I hope that more men write about these issues, and but from a sort of external looking in, I do think it would have perhaps been criticized in a different way if it had been a man. Potentially, I could see that of, you know, then you're dealing with that layer of, am I going to look like I'm mansplaining here? You know, am I going to look, you know, I can see that that would be something you'd have to contend with in the story in a way I didn't.
Pui-Wing?
I wanted to ask you, Laura, directly about the credibility of Tara Reade, and you know, whether you were surprised by the news yesterday that her credentials are being examined for when she was an expert witness on domestic violence. I mean, you've interacted with her, you know, her story changed when you talked to her. You know, now we have these questions about her credibility. Are you surprised by that? And what do you think of her credibility?
So I was surprised. I had asked her myself, you know, where did you go to college? All, you know, basic background stuff. And what CNN had reported, MJ Lee, I think, and there was a co-byline, so I don't recall the co-byline, but they spoke to Tara Reade recently, who said, and she said to them, she graduated through college through some sort of like secret program or something like that, and like the dean oversaw it, and then did it. I was like, whoa, like I didn't go check to make sure she actually had her BA or that she had graduated. You know, I didn't do that. I knew she went to college, I knew where, I knew she went to law school, and I knew she had worked in this advocacy, but I didn't dive into that. And that also was something that I was just like, maybe I need to think about that of, you know, what level of checking do you do? I think it's like, again, like, I think about Rose McGowan a lot in this story of like, some of the stuff she says is like kind of out there and stuff. And then, but it was true. Her complaint about Harvey Weinstein is real. And so that's what I kind of grapple with is, look, not everybody in the world is media savvy. Not everybody is, I don't know. I you're allowed to be a mess, and also you can be sexually harassed. And like, I'm going to look for evidence that that story is true. And so I think she's got a lot of problems. I think she has financial problems. I think she's had some strange, you know, blog posts along the way. But to me, also for this story, it was like, what am I really contending with? And that's what I'm going to focus on. And for me, it was the crux of it was she had been so specific with me that this was a story about harassment in the office. And I felt that that was a really important story to do, that, you know, we know what to do with monsters, right? Like the worst, like Harvey Weinstein should be in prison. Like that's my, that's my feeling about it. But what do you do with the guy who's like kind of weird in a meeting, and then the woman complains and then she's pushed out? It's like, that's also a really bad story. So I was trying to contend with that. And I guess I'm sort of getting off track, but the point is, to your point about credibility, I had to think about this story, like, what do I edit out? Because there was a lot of rando, like there's a lot of like, should I bring this up? I mean, like, her friend, for example, I didn't include this in the story, tantalizing detail. Her friend is a member of the Daughters of the Confederacy that funds Civil War statues. And I was like, that's weird. It's like that's different, you know, like that's a, but like, is that relevant? Like, does that mean she's not telling the truth or telling the truth? It's like, it just felt like that's a really weird detail. And like, do I put it in or not? And I ultimately was like, no, that wasn't what was forcing me to contend with this story. The things that were forcing me to contend with this were really Reade talking about her story one way last year, and then this year saying that's not the frame at all. And also, it's the media's fault that I wasn't being listened to, and this is why I'm saying this. And I really had trouble with that, because it was like, these are at odds. And so do other things then start to raise flags of like, well, she does have some, you know, in the past, like, has she misrepresented herself? Has she gotten in fights with landlords? It's like, that's not helpful. But at the end of the day, it's like, I was really trying to prioritize what are the relevant facts, and like, how can we establish the veracity of the complaint? And like, you know, like, for example, Joe Biden had paid her off. Who cares if she's like lied about where she went to college, you know, or like, who cares? Like, maybe she had a veterinarian come to her horse farm, whatever, who knows? point is Joe Biden paid her millions of dollars. Like that would be the story and it wouldn't matter. So that's why I didn't want to get too involved in like, you know, someone's broke, someone bounces checks, like, is that a reason to stop digging into their story? And for me, you know, it's, like you said, it's uncomfortable. It's like, ugh.
Laura,
Not
several
great.
of the folks watching are asking if you came across anything that would suggest what her if she had a motivation here, if there was is there a money trail that you can see, anything along those lines?
What did you say? Oh, a money trail, did you say?
Right. Is there any money trail that you can see why Tara would bring this situation up now with the election looming, was the question.
No, I mean, I don't even, like, a lot of people talk about that, of follow the money. I'm like, I can't see into her bank account. Like, I don't, you know, I can't do that. But what I can do is, like, very publicly, she has become an ardent Bernie Sanders supporter, and she came out in a different political context. You know, it was a moment at the height of the primary where it was pretty obvious that it was going to be a Joe Biden or Bernie Sanders victory. A year ago when she spoke out, who knows? I mean, say Joe Biden left the race for whatever reason, he was pushed out or something, the story caused him to leave. It's very unclear who that would have benefited at the time. Like, it was a big field, it was wide open, could it have been, it just wasn't clear. And then she came forward in that context. And she also spoke to media outlets at first that were sympathetic to Bernie Sanders. And that also, I think, it did. It's like another layer of like, well, why is she saying this? Like, she now has, like, while a year ago there wasn't a clear, like, there wasn't a clear kind of what would happen if Joe Biden left, and now it feels like somebody with a political agenda is now pushing this story. And that to me was a factor. Like, I was weighing that, and I kind of, that was something I included in the story, and I thought it was relevant as well. So, but I don't have any kind of, I don't know behind the scenes, was she I know evidence that she's some secret plant or something. It's all like, and it's one of those things where right out there. I mean, she's not hiding it. She's tweeting away, you know, teasing her story and stuff. So there's no hidden agenda. It's just right there.
Vanessa, I want to make sure you have some time here because this one caught your eye.
Yeah. I want to ask actually two things. First was about her also, and the question of like publicity and how you thought about her and her sort of reaching out to you and talking to you and kind of, you know, that aspect of what's in it for someone. Like, it doesn't always have to be money. It can be fame. It can be notoriety. It can be being part of a conversation or like shaping a moment in history, you know, which speaks to the kind of the politics of what's going on. And then also just for you, having done this kind of a story now and like delved into the first person and, you know, put your own thinking on the line, would you do it again? Has it changed how you think about writing those stories?
So in terms of the publicity, I didn't want to hit people over the head with this in the piece, but I wanted to make it clear that she was pushing me, that I made this detail, like she called me, and that she texted me 4 times to say, hey, she was very eager to get the story out there. I've reported a sort of Me Too story before, and I have been an editor on 2 stories of this sort of variety, like reported stories about a powerful man and misconduct. And it usually is like very difficult to get a woman on the record. Like, it takes a lot of time. Like, I was surprised it definitely was fast. And I was hoping to kind of show that a little bit of, you know, it took Corinne Carmone years to fully get the story done on Charlie Rose. This was a person who was like very eager. And again, doesn't mean she's not telling the truth, doesn't mean I don't, you know, but it was different. And it did make me think, this is different. It's different. And so, you know, I was cognizant of that. And I also was I was cognizant of the level of detail that she has spoken about the assault. Like when she talked about it, it was definitely different than a lot of other women we've seen step forward. And again, it's like, well, that doesn't mean, you're a liar. It doesn't mean it just means that it's different. And so if you're a reporter who's done stories before, and like any story, there are things that it's like, it's like, now this happens, now this, like, and so in this one, it was like every step there was like, yeah, it's a little different. It's a little different. In terms of first person,
Oh, go ahead.
Sorry.
I'm sorry, I cut you off. Go ahead.
Oh, that was, yeah, that was the end of that. Yeah.
How did it go over with readers? Did you notice whether it resonated, the piece?
Oh, it did. And I did get, I think one of the things that I was super surprised by, so before the story ran, Vox, it's not a secret, I can tell people, we have a whole sort of security apparatus at Vox for our physical security and our digital security and all of this. And so I met with, the head of, he's great. We have this person who's in charge of all this, and he and I met, and he's like, oh, absolutely, like this kind of story, like a political angle, it's a Me Too angle, like every kind of angle that we are like red light, we will put, they put a surveillance out on the dark web to make sure I'm not being doxxed, all this, and like, get ready. The social team is like, we'll take over your Twitter account if people start harassing you. Fully ready for that. And then the like wildest thing happened, which was I got an outpouring of positive emails from people like grappling with this themselves, which in a way I was really moved. That usually when people send me a long email, it's not good. Like it's usually not good news. It's usually like, oh, like it takes a turn into some kind of conspiracy theory or something. But these are people who read my account and wanted to say to me, I went on that journey too, that I am somebody who wants to believe women. I care a lot about this. I've had trouble grappling with this. And it really helped me to read you grappling with this, which to me, my big fear of the piece would be that it would just, people were like, what? You were the first person about how hard this was for you. Like, you're not a victim of anything. Like, what is your, that it would just be like self-indulgent perhaps. And a lot of people felt like they had a kind of person going along on this experience with them. And that was sort of a lot of the gist of the emails about kind of feeling like this was a story that really helped them through something. And a lot of the emails would also weren't reaching a conclusion either, which was really interesting to me. They're like, well, I don't know where I stand, but thank you for all the, was I that helpful if you're still in this gray zone? But I think maybe it just made people feel okay that they're in a gray zone. And I was really moved by that kind of outpouring from people. No problems really. I was really moved. And for people to take the time and write out their thoughts and share them back with me was really profound. It really was, I was just very moved.
Yeah. Sam?
Laura, Mike, I'm curious, the two of you've reported on this and you know the trajectory of these kinds of stories. Do you think that there's resolution to come with the Tara Reade story, or is this something that just reporting cannot answer and we're going to be stuck in this muddle through the election?
As Laura called it, was it the miasma of uncertainty?
Right.
Mike?
I mean, I guess it really depends on what else comes out. If there are, if it becomes part of a larger story about settlements and of other accusers coming forward and folks that are telling similar stories. One of the things that Emily and I looked for in our reporting was a sort of a pattern of behavior where things repeating themselves. And if there's a pattern that emerges, then maybe this account is given more credibility because there's other things that back it up. But if it stands alone, does that allow more questions to be raised about that? And I think it really depends just simply on that. And what else? What do you think, Laura?
I agree. I think it is unfair, perhaps, to any individual woman who wants to step forward with a story that her own account on its own is much harder to corroborate, and that when there is this pattern of abuse, that it makes it, it elevates every story. It elevates you know, two women who never knew each other years apart have this story that they told. It elevates everybody's case, and Tara Reade doesn't have that. And you know, I guess I can't predict the future, but I think a lot of, you know, there's been other reporting on this too since my story came out. Like PBS NewsHour did a big piece where they talked to, I think, 80 people who had worked in the office. And again, of course, people have an interest. People who still support Biden or work for him aren't going to come out and trash him per se, but there isn't. I did not get any leads. Nobody reached out to me after my story ran. There's been no. I'm not seeing that pattern emerge. So short of that, it's sort of hard to imagine. And it would be really out of, to me, it would be pretty profound story if suddenly it was like, whoa, like Joe Biden has been hiding all of this, and like many reporters digging in haven't found it. Not to say it can't happen, but yeah, I don't know. But in terms of its effect long term, I don't know. I feel, to me right now, my sense is the story has sort of shifted in the last week. Like we're seeing a lot of stories, I think, to the point of credibility of, you know, quite a few pieces have come out that are raising questions about whether she is as honest as I wish she was.
Have you heard from her since the piece went up?
No, actually, we always had a good rapport. I always liked talking to her. She liked to talk to me. I was sick a couple months ago, and she had heard, and she texted me, like checking in. Like she's, but right before the story ran, I did a final check with her where I did a fact check and a kind of like a quote check, which I had promised her I would do, and she didn't. She agreed. She had said all the things I was saying, but she became very angry with me. And was very, very angry. And she said, "You're writing a hit piece on me." And I said, "I'm not. I'm writing," you know, she was very angry with me and told me she had hired a lawyer and that the lawyer was going to sue me or something. And she had told me the day before she didn't have a lawyer. So it was like, well, are you just saying that? It was sort of a kind of messy ending. And she hired her spokeswoman. I contacted her to ask her a final question, and she just directed me to her spokeswoman. So I never heard from her after the story ran, but that's how it ended, kind of ugly.
How many drafts of the story did you write?
Probably 4, like 4 kind of versions of it. The first stab was kind of a rough thing, and then, I would say I did 4 versions, and the first version versus the final was really different. So I'm actually more of an editor per se than a writer reporter. I run a team of reporters, but I do write from time to time, and this was I had a good editing experience of like really helping me focus and take multiple swings at it to really get at what I was trying to say. I actually really struggled. I often know what I want to write, and that's when I jump in and write something, but this was really hard. So I took a lot of swings at it.
Well, thank you so much for
Thanks.
walking us through it. This has been a really great discussion.
Great.
Does anybody have anything else they want, or should we wrap it up? Thanks again, Laura.
Thank you so
welcome.
much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank
Bye,
you.
guys. See you next week.
See you next week.